Chapter 47. When two wrongs don't make a right, try three. Ariel. Her palm was sliced, and a sheen of red coated her hand and trickled in scattered drops onto the floor. A peculiar prickle spread through her fingers, even though the cut itself didn't hurt. Ariel needed bandages, but as she walked through her bedroom door on Dragonstone, she didn't end up in the hallway as normal, but instead her room suddenly entered directly into the great staircase, except there was no such thing on Dragonstone, and this wasn't the one in the Red Keep either. A thrill ran through her, and Ariel stared hard at the great double doors across the hall. The visage was familiar yet distant, like a long-past childhood memory on the precipice of being forgotten. She crossed the space with quick strides until she reached the doors. Laying her hands flat against the heavy door, she pushed them ajar with surprising ease. Without a sound, the door opened into the great hall of Hogwarts. 1,000 lights twinkled from floating candles. The sun shone down through the enchanted ceiling. The fireplaces crackled. The sight washed over her, feeling like Hagrid's laughter, a dog's affections, Norbert's warm scales, mixed together in a loving embrace. It was everything she'd ever wanted, and the yearning consumed her until it was near crippling. The 4 tables were decorated in their respective red, blue, yellow and green, and stretched from the entrance doors to the staff table at the front. As Ariel's gaze moved back and forth over the crowd, searching for the right faces, a part of her knew this was a dream. All the same, it felt natural when her eyes trailed over Prince Daeron and Jacaerys at the Gryffindor table, past Helena seated in a crowd of Ravenclaws, as well as where Rhaena passed Aegon a jug of wine at a Hufflepuff table. Ariel kept searching, but couldn't find either Ron or Hermione. She got a glimpse of red hair, but it turned out to be Jacqueline Redwine, not a Weasley. She stopped by the spot where she, Ron and Hermione had once shared their meals. The seats were empty, and the only one who'd shown for breakfast was Ron's rat Scabbers, nibbling on a piece of cheese. She made to pick him up. Ron would want his pet when she found him, but she ended up bleeding over the rat. Oh, right. She was bleeding. Scabbers scurried off, faster than she could remember the fat rat being able to move before, leaving the bloodstained cheese behind. When Hera looked for something to clean it up, someone tapped her shoulder. "What are you looking for?" asked Aemond. "I need bandages," she explained, showing him the bleeding wound. He pulled up the white sleeves of his Slytherin uniform before taking her hand. He inspected it. "It isn't deep. It will pass by itself," he mused. "But I'm making a mess. Then mayhaps Professor Fang can assist you." "Professor Fang?" "Aye, he's over there." Aemond nodded towards the head table, drawing Ariel's attention to the queer scene up there. Princess Rhaenyra and Prince Daemon were on one side, while Queen Alicent and the Hand were seated on the other. In the headmaster's chair was neither Albus Dumbledore nor King Viserys, but Fang the Boarhound. The black dog was having the time of his life being served a feast by both the princess and the queen, the 2 women competing for his attention with juicy offerings. "Fang!" Ariel called, laughing as she ran up, but just as she reached the head table, the room changed. Between one blink and the next, Fang was gone, and the great hall disintegrated and reshaped into a different place Ariel didn't remember. It was wider and taller, with a draft whirling through the room. Instead of the beautifully enchanted ceiling with floating candles, there were literal holes in the roof. If it started to rain, the hall would get flooded. With carved columns, ribbed arches and vaults, the structure almost reminded her of the old abbeys in England, though so much bigger. It was the largest hall she'd ever stepped into, both broader and twice as high than the throne room of the Red Keep. Instead of house tables, people stood in rows facing the front, as if they were at court watching petitions. The breeze from outside blew in through the holes in the roof and walls, ruffling beards, curls, skirts, cloaks and colourful heraldry aside. "Over 1,000 lords have made the journey to Harrenhal," a male voice called, strong and carrying, though Ariel couldn't tell who had spoken. She put pressure on her cut, but it wasn't stopping the bleeding. She was starting to understand though. The ruined, drafty hall for nobles, the setup. Was Hyrule at Harrenhal during the Great Council of 101, where King Jaehaerys put the succession of the Iron Throne between his own chosen heir Viserys and the lawful heir Princess Rhaenys to the vote? It was. The realization gripped Hyrule with a sense of urgency. The outcome of this mattered. She didn't know why, it had been years ago, but somehow she knew history or relied on the outcome of this. It could make or break the realm. The right candidate had to win, or it'd mean war. It'd mean dragonfire and calamity. It meant... It has been declared by all lords paramount and lords vassals of the Seven Kingdoms that the chosen successor of His Grace, the old king, is... Thud, thud, thud. The crowd started applauding, hollering and booing all at once. The uproar was like the spectators on a Quidditch match, where half the supporters cheered in victorious ecstasy, and the other half in frustrated disappointment. But Hyrule didn't know why. The strange knocking had drowned out the verdict. She'd missed it. Wait, who won? Thud, thud, thud. The world spun away and Hyrule stirred from her restless slumber. She blinked into darkness, and for several seconds she didn't understand where she was. This bed wasn't her bed. The sheets were thicker and the wool different against her skin. The air wasn't salty and there were strange sounds. More knocking. Thud, thud. Initially the dream felt more vivid than reality and closer to a nightmare. Though the ending annoyed her. She'd awoken before learning the verdict. Silly though that was. Awake, she knew perfectly well that King Viserys won, and though the defeat had surely stung, Princess Rhaenys had sense enough to not go to war over the rights of that porcupine of a chair. She tried to hold on to the details of the dream, but the scenes underneath her lids were fading quickly, then at once it turned into intangible drifting smoke when... Lady Hyrule? The voice was that of a stranger, and finally the pieces realigned into a proper picture. She was in the Red Keep. Sitting up, Hyrule fumbled for the hangings of her four-poster bed in the darkness. She found a gap and pulled the drapes apart, breaking the ceiling of her warm cocoon. Cold air washed into the bed and her skin prickled with goosebumps. With the window blind shut for the night to preserve heat, the dying embers in the fireplace served as the only source of light. Come! Hyrule yawned. Come in. The door creaked ajar, and a maid entered with a lantern in one hand and a tray of food in the other. Good morn, my lady. Pardon for waking you early, but we did not receive any specifications regarding your preferences. You didn't give the kitchen any preferences, so please forgive me for making assumptions. But I brought a plate of eggs, cheese, and a ham to break your fast, my lady. If it's not to your liking, I can run down to get you something else before dawn breaks. Hyrule had stepped into her slippers, pulled her cloak snugly over her shoulders and walked over to peer between the cracks in the window shutters. But the time appeared pretty close to what her inner clock suspected, that it was the middle of the night. Thank you. What's your name? I'm Frida, my lady. It's nice to meet you, Frida. Hyrule stifled another yawn. I'm Hyrule Potter. The woman smiled. I'm aware, my lady. I'm in the service of the Hand, Lord Otto Hightower. He assigned me to attend to you during your visits, as your last attendant travelled with Princess Helena to Dragonstone. That was thoughtful of him. The food smells delicious. But why did you think to wake me at this hour? The sun has not yet breached the horizon. It's the Maiden's Day, my lady. Oh. Great. Maiden's Day. On the day of the smith, the small cook feasted and got drunk. Father's Day was Judgment Day, which meant an increase in trials, verdicts, and sometimes executions. On the day of the warrior, everyone toasted the dead knights and soldiers who had protected the lands. Whilst on Maiden's Day, the general rule was that all maidens must be miserable. All female virgins, though not male virgins for some reason, were ordered to fast and do nothing but sing and pray from sunset to sunset. This would somehow purify them, though Hariel wasn't sure how. If going hungry was pure, then it was peculiar how the small folk in Fleabottom were called scum so often. There were few in the realm who went hungrier than them. Having to participate for Maiden's Day also put a pin in her plans. Hariel had meant to spend the rest of the day pestering the City Watch. Surely she'd be able to sneak away for 5 minutes. It was for a rather justified cause after all. Hariel had been updated since they'd reported their findings to the commander of the City Watch, Sir Fish Crab. She needed to know what they'd found out. Had they gone down to the house? Had they learned anything new? Was the man without a tongue questioned? Was anyone else? Impatience stirred, and made Hariel second-guess the wisdom of following Aemond's suggestion at all. She'd been too caught up in their game and too engrossed in the flirting. He'd taken her cloak and wand. There'd been a chase before she'd become distracted. Hariel's stomach fluttered, and her remaining drowsiness dissolved at the thought of seeing Aemond again. It was going so well, wasn't it? Despite all the things that had felt unfair and unjust of late, he was the one thing that was going right. He spent so much time perfecting his courtly arts, from sword fighting to his poetry, and Hariel thought it impressive, yet preferred him best when away from court, with dragons, magic and mysteries and secret passages. They'd gotten the hang of his kissing business too. Yesterday's kisses had been 1,000 times better than their first disastrous attempt. Laughing and joking around with him made her deprioritize everything else. Which is why, despite knowing perfectly well that her magic could serve just as well, Hariel didn't truly regret that Aemond got his way. Smiling to herself, Hariel ate her breakfast while wondering when Aemond could be persuaded to join her in the city again. Or maybe they could fly out to the Point of Cracklaw together. It was not only something they could do for fun, but needed to get done, and Hariel was looking forward to it. Though she wasn't hungry, Hariel finished the plate of eggs, cheese and ham and the cup of milk, knowing her next meal was far off. After she finished, Hariel stole a couple more hours of sleep, waking up when the sun had risen and more of the castle than the kitchen had started their day. Then again, was there a time the kitchen wasn't active? During the day there was food preparations, and at night the staff was busy baking for the following day. Outside it was grey and windy. Dreary clouds rolled across the sky, throwing gusts of wind in over Blackwater Bay that clashed against the castle walls, making the Red Keep whisper and moan. With little hope of a sunny day, Hariel changed into the warmest gown she'd brought along. She'd arrived prepared for cold weather, but unprepared for Maiden's Day, as it was traditional to wear white. Hariel took out her wand and transfigured her gown to the color of cream. Just for the fun of it, Hariel took it a step further and started transfiguring snowflakes and animated them to slowly fall from a cloud like a clutter of white snowflakes around her waist, down into the snowy ground along the bottom of the skirt. She was pocketing her wand when a muffled clatter made her head jerk up, and she listened. Her eyes trailed across the room, uncertain where the noise came from. It hadn't sounded as firm as when someone knocked, but regardless, Hariel walked over and opened her door to make sure, finding nothing. Maybe it had been inside one of the other rooms? The wind? Her neck prickled, and with slightly more urgency, she shut the door to finish getting ready. She slipped on her footwear and her Acromentala silk cloak. It kept to the white trend of the day, even if it wasn't the warmest. At least it was airtight and water repellent, which made a difference when she made the trek down the chilly castle hallways, all the while wondering if there were eyes in the walls watching her. Hariel had been nice throughout yesterday, and refrained from nagging the City Watch for updates, but it was dawn of a new day, and her patience wouldn't suffer another day of uncertainty. The sermon in the sept wasn't for another hour, so she decided to head directly to Barracks 2. That was where the units guarding 3 of the city gates lived and worked. She knew those soldiers who weren't on duty from the Dragon's Gate, Iron Gate and the River Gate, who had no other home or wanted to save their coin, would be eating breakfast there. Hariel had seen men come and go from the building at every hour of the day, but she'd never ventured into it herself. So when she crossed the courtyard and came windswept and pink-cheeked up to the door, requesting entrance, she may have been allowed inside, but she sure got a lot of weird looks too. When she saw the corridor split into 3 different directions, Hariel asked the 6th guard she passed for directions instead of the former ones, as he was the first that didn't stare at her like she was a shrimp swimming with the sharks. Pardon, but could you point me in the direction of the meal hall? Yes, milady. It's down that corridor and around the corner. He pointed to the left. There's a wide red door and, you shouldn't miss it, milady. Thank you, good man. Unfamiliarity and poor lighting slowed her pace, but once she turned the corner and the noise of chattering voices became louder and more pronounced, she knew the shy soldier had been right that it was easy to find. She reached the red door, pushed it open and peeked inside. She'd arrived during the breakfast hours, and the hall was full to the brim with soldiers. Ariel knew she didn't belong here, and it was intimidating, but she swallowed it down and walked into the hall with her head held high. Now what? She looked around for the commander. He was rather distinct looking, but there were so many men here, most in similar attires. They may not be bothering with the gold cloaks and armor while off duty, but there was still a unifying theme of blacks, greys and red on nearly everyone. Lady Ariel? What are you doing here? The familiar voice was very welcome. Relieved, Ariel turned to find that Gawain Hightower had been standing near the entrance doors the entire time, talking with another man. He said goodbye to his friend and walked up to her. This is the barracks. Are you lost? Good morning, Sir Gawain, Ariel replied. No, I am not. I'm looking for your commander, Sir Fish Crab. Sir Fish? He asked. Ariel knew it might be seen as arrogant to go directly to the commander of the City Watch, a little like going to the chief of the London police force for a missing dog, but he happened to be the one Emmett had given orders to. I'm not sure what you want with him, but wouldn't it be better to do this another day? It's Maiden's Day. Had Ariel been the only one to forget what day it was? Then again, maybe Sir Gawain was keeping tabs because he had a daughter who would be participating too. It's more than Maiden's Day, Ariel said. It's also a day the City Watch might have answers regarding my dog's death, which didn't hold yesterday. And I'm an impatient lass. Do you know where he is, Sir Gawain? I do. You're fortunate he's eating here in the barracks instead of his rooms today, Sir Gawain said and nodded across the hall. I'll escort you to him. As Barracks 2 was where about 1/3 of the City Watch lived and worked, to see a girl walking around in glaring white in the heart of their headquarters made a few heads turn. She stood out like a sore thumb, making Harold shuffle closer at Sir Gawain's heel. It wasn't like she had a lot of time though, and Harold sucked it up. The breakfast options changed the further into the hall they got. At first it appeared everyone had porridge or bread and cheese, but a little further in men were eating scrambled eggs and beans instead. The food got steadily better, and by the time they reached the commander, who had a table to himself, the air smelled of bacon, sausage, gravy and beer. Sir Fish Crab watched them approach his table with small, bright grey eyes and furrowed brows. The commander of the City Watch was a burly man almost as tall as Ariel while sitting down, with thin grey hair that contrasted the long, blonde beard that grew so thick he'd pulled it into a braid so long it was rolled up on the table. He was older than most of his subordinates too, or perhaps the grey hair made it appear so. Sir Gawain? Commander? Gawain returned his commander's greeting neutrally, his tone respectful but not deferential. Gawain Hightower commanded the protection of the river gate, making his station one step underneath Sir Fish Crab. Lady Ariel Potter requested a word with you. It shouldn't take long, Ariel added. Fish Crab gave a brief nod towards the chair opposite him. Take a seat then. The commander's corner had a fireplace and its own window, though at present the wooden window shutters were firmly sealed shut. This corner of the barracks was actually quite secluded from curious watchers. Her seat was the more visible one, but thanks to the L shape of the hall, as well as the directions of the other tables, most were facing away, giving an illusion of privacy amidst the crowded hall. I must say, this is not somewhere a maiden is likely to visit, the commander of the City Watch speculated. We seldom see visitors from the ladies of court, and I never think a maiden has come in here on Maiden's Day before today. Sir Fish wasn't looking at her with a warm welcome, though he wasn't being rude either. Harold had the impression she was actually interrupting him, but the man didn't feel like he could turn her away, and now he only suffered her presence to get it over with. My apologies for inconveniencing you while you're off duty, sir. Hale brushed it off. This was his job, and she had every right to ask about this. But I wanted a word with you before the sermon started. Could you tell me what was done about Prince Aemon's report yesterday? It's being handled, Lady Potter, the commander told her. Did you send your men to the house we reported on? He frowned. I know this is regarding the breach Lord Rubius Hagrid suffered, but my orders are from Prince Aemon, not yourself, Lady Potter. He's to be my husband, Ariel said. Aemon only gave the order on my behalf. Be this as it may, Lady Potter, but it was the young prince who gave the command. We have rules regarding this, though this shouldn't be an issue. I will report on our progress to Prince Aemon, and if he is of a mind to share, I'm sure he will tell his betrothed what has been done. Ariel sighed. He's with Sir Harold today, and I'll be busy too. More than a week has passed with absolutely zero results reported from the City Watch, and if something finally has, it's going to make me restless not knowing what's happening. Is there anything you can tell me without breaking the rules? At least tell me if you followed up on the order. I did, he said simply. That was not as satisfying a confirmation as she wanted. What did you learn? That's classified. She held in a groan. This is about a fault in the castle security that affected Lord Rubius Hagrid, not the prince. I am the one who's made all the discoveries too. Please, lass, you're hardly the only one. Smirking, Harry leaned forwards. Oh? Can you give an example to the contrary? The commander chewed on the inside of his cheeks, as if regretting his slip. This is regarding the security of the king's castle, as well as a slight against Lord Rubius. You are not him. I'm Hagrid's heir and his representative at court, Ariel said, her fingers tapping impatiently against the tabletop. I was the one who found Fang and discovered the breach. I'm aware of that too. It's hardly commonplace for ladies to wander down into the black cells. Not the proper ones, at least, the commander said, his voice gruffer and expression tight. Ariel's fingers stopped tapping. She shouldn't have had to deal with this to begin with, and he just insulted her character to her face. What was I supposed to do when the soldiers can't do their job properly? Your men listened to the crime happening but did nothing but try to turn me away. Another task they failed at. I've had enough of this. Little lady, why don't you head off to pray for your precious hound and give us room to work? We know how to handle this. What a relief, she said, trying but failing to hide the sarcasm. I was starting to believe your reluctance to share your progress meant you simply failed and had nothing to relay, she said speculatively. But that's not the case. After all, unless the culprit is caught, what will he think to bring down there next? Another dog? Or a man? Hagrid himself? Me? To be left dead in your dungeons whilst the City Watch stands idly by. Something like this never happened in Dragonstone, and it's enough to give little ladies like me a bad night's sleep. Prince Damon is a fine commander, but even so, the castle there is easier to protect than the Red Keep. Commander Fish stuffed his mouth with more bacon, chewing demonstratively. Ariel's hands fisted, and she had a mind to turn the fire in the hearth into leaping lions again as she'd done with Aemon once. Maybe that would get a proper reaction out of the man. Maybe it'd show us some sliver of responsibility for this mess too. But she couldn't replicate it, as that had been accidental magic. Stiff and irritated, Ariel pushed back her chair and rose to her feet, giving up on this avenue with a curt, I see how it is. Have a nice day, Commander. Throughout the conversation, Sir Gawain had waited nearby, chatting with another high-ranking knight of the City Watch. When he saw her stand up, he excused himself and went to escort her out of the barracks. How did it go with Sir Fish? Sir Gawain wondered as they reached the hallway, away from most of the curious eyes of the soldiers in the hall. I asked what the City Watch had learned about Fang's killer, but he wouldn't tell me anything. She looked up at Gawain speculatively. And I guess if your commander won't speak plainly, you won't either? The knight arched a brow, highlighting his similarities with his sister, the Queen. Sir Fish Crab is only following protocol, my lady. Sir Gawain said, but unlike Fish's sour demeanour, the High Tower said it with a smirk and a glint in his eyes, softening the blow of the irritating message. I only want to know if the City Watch followed up on what we discovered in the city yesterday. I was of a mind to ask questions directly, but Aemon talked me into trusting the City Watch instead. But I must say, the matter has been handled leaves a lot to be desired, sir. Sir Gawain's smile faltered. Our orders comes from the royal family, and you're not part of them. Yet. Though maybe I can reassure some of your concerns anyway. I can tell you this much. We have some new prisoners in the dungeons, and a peculiar coincidence is that some of the faces were familiar ones. Bewildered, Hale glanced at Gawain from the corner of her eye. What was that supposed to mean? Was he talking of friends, or people he or someone else knew? As in, the guy had been a traitor? Had been part of the staff of the Red Keep? Because he certainly hadn't appeared like a noble. Or... hadn't Aemon guessed the man without a tongue was probably a felon? That he'd lost his tongue as punishment? That meant he might have been in the dungeons before, and now imprisoned once again. Is one of them particularly challenging to get information from? Gawain thought on it for a moment. All of them are hard of speech. All of them? How many were all in this scenario? 3? 5? 10? Harry had no clue. Did that mean they refused to talk, or that all of them lacked a tongue? After that thought-provoking hint, Sir Gawain didn't reveal anything else, though the knight still insisted on following her back. He escorted her from the barracks back across the windy courtyard and into the castle, before Harry was able to shake him off. Walking slowly, Harry pondered what might be happening in the cells on her way to the royal sept. She was so engrossed she walked right into Princess Rhaenys. My apologies, Harry stammered. They'd come around the corner at the same time, and with her head full of speculations and plots, Harry hadn't registered the approaching footsteps. It's fine, Lady Harriel, Princess Rhaenys said, before noting the significance of her white attire. Is it Maiden's Day? Aye, Harriel nodded. She had seen her arrive on the ship Sir Laenor the day before, but since they'd been sneaking out at the time, she hadn't met the princess before later that evening. Are you on your way to break your fast, princess? As a grandmother, the princess hadn't been a maiden in decades, and therefore couldn't follow the traditions anymore. Lucky her. I just broke my fast, and I was on my way to meet the queen, Rhaenys said. I presume you're on your way to the sept. I am. It's not that she had no choice. She wouldn't be breaking any law if she didn't participate. It was just... every maiden at court, regardless of if they followed the seven or not, who chose not to participate on Maiden's Day were assumed to not be maidens anymore. Some cultural blunders had been overlooked when she'd been younger and less integrated, and back then she could blame the language barrier too, but those days were long gone. Ariel was a woman grown, and unless she wanted quips about how, since you didn't participate on Maiden's Day, does that mean you're not a maiden? She was better off participating. Going hungry and bored for a day was better than months of jokes at her expense. There were 4 Maiden's Days a year, but Ariel perked up as she now knew it wouldn't be forever. In a year and some months, she'd marry Aemond and would be able to skip this whole thing, the same as Princess Rhaenys did. The fasting wasn't much different than what she dealt with at the Dursleys, but spending a whole day praying and singing was so boring. It's good to see you, Lady Harriel, Rhaenys said, though I did not expect your presence in the capital. Why not? After what befell your hound, both you and Lord Rubius seemed distressed. I thought you'd leave for Dragonstone. Oh, we did, Harriel clarified. I returned on my own, the same as yourself. Will Lord Corlys join us too, or did he return to the war in the Stepstones? He's on his way back to the Stepstones, she confirmed, then seemed to remember something. Also, forgive me the oversight, but I have been remiss to not congratulate you on your betrothal. Thank you. This means you'll become my granddaughter's sister in a year's time, and Prince Aemond is a fine match, Rhaenys said politely. It is. Indeed, Renee said, clasping her hands together. Love can grow from duty, but it's easier when it's a desired match from the beginning. Ariel guessed the princess was thinking of Bela there. Perhaps she was contemplating how different her granddaughter's situation was compared to Ariel's. What had she expected though? Despite knowing how Bela felt about her betrothal, she'd done nothing to object to it. Like nearly everyone else, she'd been pushing Bela into this marriage. All these royal weddings and betrothals, it reminds me of days long past, Renee said thoughtfully. My betrothal was actually more akin to yours though. Is that so? Or perhaps not entirely the same, she corrected herself. I asked my grandfather to marry Corlys, but before that, my husband was first offered to marry Princess Diala. Wasn't that Princess Rhaenyra's grandmother? The one who married an Arryn, Queen Emma's mother? It was. I don't remember her well. Aunt Diala left for the Vale when I was 6 to marry. She died within a couple of years birthing her daughter, Emma. Though I heard she was a small, shy and kind princess, Renee said. At any rate, my husband turned down the offer as he was still too enamored with his voyages to settle down yet, and my aunt married Lord Roderick Arryn, whilst Corlys married me in time instead. Ariel's eyebrows climbed up her forehead. A substantial percentage of Westeros would kill to be the spouse of a prince or princess. So for a moment Ariel amused herself imagining Lord Corlys Velaryon saying, "No thank you," to a marriage offer from the old king himself. It had probably been turned down tactfully, though considering how marriageable all Targaryens felt they were, which was not entirely unfounded when lords and ladies literally lined up if there was a possibility, it was still funnier to imagine a more blunt retort. Though it also made her speculate about the age difference between Rhaenys and Corlys. How old had Corlys been when he married? About 40? That was quite late for a first marriage, made more glaring when Ariel knew his bride had been 16. That's right, Ariel nodded. But thinking of how Princess Rhaenys, Corlys, Diala, Viserys, Rhaenyra and so many of the older generations had been given a say in who they married, a courtesy no one had allowed Bela and Aegon when it had been their turn. The whole thing made her eternally thankful Aemond had been so proactive about this. He hadn't so much waited for a match to be made for him. Instead, he manipulated the situation until it fit the outcome he wanted. In that way, he was aching to Rhaenys, who had also made marriage arrangements for herself too. Excuse me, princess, but I should get going. The sermon will start soon. And don't let me keep you, Rhaenys said. You don't want to make Bela wait for your company in the Sept. Normally, she'd spend the Maiden's Day with the twins, but not only was Rhaena on an island out at sea, but though they were in the same sept, going through the same prayers, songs and instructions, it felt like Bela was avoiding her. When Ariel had entered the sept and said good morning to Bela when she passed by, she'd initially thought the girl hadn't heard, and that's why it wasn't returned. Dressed in white, Bela was seated between Grace Wild and Ballerina Rosby. As Bela had been talking with Lady Grace and the sermon was about to start, Ariel had simply found an available seat across the aisle and hadn't thought further on it. The sermon started with singing and praying led by a septa. Normally a septon held these, but only virgin females were allowed in the sept on Maiden's Day, so no mothers, widows, whores or males regardless of chastity were allowed in, and that included septons. Though after an hour Ariel was getting extremely bored. The seats were hard and uncomfortable. The septa's speech of purification had turned into a distant drone that seemed to last an eternity. Her eyelids grew heavy, her vision blurred, and Ariel knew that if she didn't do something, she'd fall asleep. Trying fruitlessly to blink the sleepiness away, Ariel looked around the sept for distractions. Her gaze moved dully over the 7 statues in each corner, and momentarily imagined the septa's reaction if she used an animation spell on the old crone, so the statue of the old lady started swinging her lantern around. It didn't entertain her for long, and it was when Bela happened to glance in Ariel's direction. When their eyes met, Ariel smiled, but Bela had turned stiffly away. Huh? The sermon went on, but by the time noon finally came around, Ariel was positive Bela was purposely keeping away from her. When he'd stood up to form a line to light candles around the statue of the maiden, Bela had walked to the very back of the line to get further away from Hariel. Then, when the morning session was over, Bela had slipped into the hallway so fast Hariel hadn't had a chance to ask what the hell was going on. What had gotten into her? The last time they spoke, everything had been fine. Sort of. Bela had moved away from her loved ones to a new place. She was married to someone she didn't want while dealing with the pressure after her husband was crippled. And to top it all off, she started her period, which was enough for most girls to panic a little. Though besides that, at least things had been well between the two of them. What had changed? A sinking feeling settled in her stomach, because she had a guess or two regarding what it could be. They had a few hours off to make garlands for the afternoon sermon, and Hariel finished her own in record time before she went searching for Bela. She was not in her chamber. Oddly enough, that one had been emptied and was being cleaned instead. A confused Hariel was directed to Aegon's apartment. I heard Lady Bela was here, Hariel said to the guard outside. Could you tell her Hariel Potter is here to see her? The guard only had to go a few steps down the corridor and inside the door to relay the request, but it took several minutes before he returned. Hariel wondered if she was about to be turned away, but with a blank expression he allowed her entrance. Uncertain what awaited her, Hariel went to face it. Inside Aegon's apartments, she quickly noticed Bela wasn't alone. A pair of round purple eyes peeked out at her from underneath a blanket on the bench by the fireplace. Hi, Tree Skipper. Hariel smiled to the little Valyrian. The purple eyes blinked, and a little snout reached out, sniffing the air curiously. Alongside the lemur, Grace Wilde had joined Bela for the Maiden's Day activity. Seated around the dining table, Lady Grace looked up, her amber eyes crinkling and round face brightening by a crooked smile. Hariel returned a polite one, uncertain how to react. She'd never quite known where to place Lady Grace Wilde. Grace was 14 years old and one of the Master of Laws, Jasper Wilde's many children. She had curly black hair with dimples in her round face. Though Hariel hadn't forgotten how Grace had gossiped about her with Jacqueline Redwine. Yet interestingly, Grace seemed able to make friends with Helena as easily as she could Bela, and there weren't many who did that. She'd sometimes wondered if it was a sibling thing for Grace. There were around 19 wild children, or was it 18? Hariel believed she'd heard something about how Jasper Wilde received a letter that told him one of his older daughters had died in childbirth a few months back, but wasn't his fourth wife pregnant as well? Had the baby been born yet? Though with so many siblings, perhaps Lady Grace was used to accompanying different personalities. The table was littered with materials, divided between two distinct piles. While Grace was using pale branches for her garland and strips of white cloth, Bela was making her garland from parchment instead. It was a more fragile material, not to mention wastefully costly for perfectly usable parchment, but the parchment garlands would also end up the widest, which was a key color of Maiden's Day. Have you already finished your garland, Lady Hariel? Grace asked, not a trace of dislike to be found. One could almost forget she'd once gossiped with Jacqueline of how ugly Hariel's scar was. Hariel lifted her garland up. I did. Hers was made of pale branches and white bows tied with even spacing. The morning ceremony had been singing, praying and lighting candles, but they would return in the afternoon and drape their finished garland around the statue too, with some more singing and praying. Then there was the evening ceremony where there would be, who could have guessed it, yet more singing and praying. Of course, she needs to make no effort with her magic, Bela murmured without looking up from her work. She was using a fancy, silvery moonstone dagger to slice her parchment, sliding it downwards in a careful pattern. Was the knife new? Hariel had certainly never seen it before. What do you want, Hariel? She asked, while poorly concealed irritation oozed from every syllable. I wanted to see how you were faring, and when did you move into Aegon's apartments? Hariel asked, eyeing Tree Skipper soaking in the heat of the fireplace, and several of Bela's belongings stored sporadically amongst Aegon's. Another new development. I moved in yesterday. Since Aegon is recovering on the ground floor, I thought to get the rest over with. I woke up here for the first time this morning. They are very nice rooms. It was larger than Helena's chambers, and instead of looking out over the horizon of Blackwater Bay, the windows of Aegon's apartments had a view of the city. There was an arched entrance into the dressing room, a bedchamber and a snuggery beyond that. This was nicer than some of the family apartments within the Red Keep. What's going on? Ariel got to the point with a sense of foreboding. There were only a few things that could make Bella this disagreeable. What do you mean? Bella adjusted the parchment into a new angle and sunk her knife through the soft sheet. Is something the matter, Bella? You seem upset with me and I wondered why. Bella's smirk was mockingly sharp, highlighting the similarities she shared with her father. I don't think you do. Sighing, Harold turned to Grace. Would you excuse us, Lady Grace? I'm not quite finished, Grace said, gesturing to her work. Could you finish it in your own rooms? If it's crowded, mine is available, and you're welcome to use it to finish your garland, Ariel said. I don't mean to put you out, but I'd like to have a private word with Bella. Grace turned to Bella for permission, and didn't move until she received an agreeable nod from the Targaryen. Quickly and effective, Grace scooped her belongings unceremoniously into her arms. With a friendly smile and a "I'll see you at the afternoon sermon," Grace disappeared out of the door. Finally alone, Harold didn't know how to start, and instead watched Bella cut out her paper garland with less and less care. If she wasn't careful, she'd slice her hand. That sparked her memory. Hadn't she dreamt something about a bloody cut? Across the table, Bella wrinkled her nose, her knuckles white from clutching her dagger, fighting for control of her temper. Harold would rather she succeeded that battle. An unrestrained Bella was an unreasonable Bella. What happened, Bella? You can't guess? I believe you wish to throw accusations at me, so why don't you speak your mind? With a downward thrust and a thud, the knife pierced clean through the parchment and deep into the wooden surface. Bella let go of the handle, leaving the sharp tip embedded in the tabletop and the blade swaying precariously. Did you talk to the king? Bella asked tightly. The intensity in her expression wasn't something Harold had seen often. About me? When? She was tense, an instinctive reaction as she tried to ready herself for an impact. Some moons ago? Before I was betrothed? Ariel folded her arms on the tabletop, trying to think of the right way to explain. What did you hear? That you convinced the king to make Jace marry Helena instead of me. Did you do it? Her heart sank. So she'd guessed right, but that was of little comfort. Harold sank into Grace's abandoned seat, and whatever expression displayed across her face must have revealed the truth, because Bella suddenly looked thunderous. I talked to the king about the state of his house, she explained. Let me think. I was translating one of my books. You remember, do you not? The one about divination. When Rhaenyra went into labor and everyone rushed out. I stayed behind with the king and Sir Harold. We mostly talked of magic, my homeland and old Valyria. But we also talked about his succession. And then? I told him that there's no unity within House Targaryen. That his closest kin and supporters are split in two, and the rift is getting worse. I relayed my concerns and accounts about those unpleasant rumors that followed Jacaerys and his brothers, and how it shouldn't be ignored. Bella looked torn, and Harold thought she'd make a remark about it. Instead, Bella's brows furrowed and she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. That's not what I asked. It sort of is, Ariel said. Because whilst we were talking about that topic, I mentioned Helena. I said something needed to be done and suggested Helena could mend the rift in your family through a marriage to Jace, in ways no other match could. No other match, Bella said stiffly, her voice small, yet cutting like a knife. What am I then? Or is this part of your cover? Is that why you spent the moon since my betrothal preaching of how I'm too young to marry, only for me now to learn it's you who threw me to Aegon? Aegon? No, I don't remember talking of Aegon that day. Ariel spluttered. Her face flushed. She wasn't sure how the excuse would be received, though. Ariel had known Bella would be furious that she'd recommended Helena for Jacaerys, but she'd done it anyway. Simultaneously, it hadn't felt so much as a choice as a necessity. It's not as if Ariel was eager to support aunt and nephew incest, which was worse than the cousin thing. But everyone was complaining and throwing dangerous accusations around, yet no one bothered to do anything about it either. If they did, it was actions that only made the situation worse and more divided. Even if it hadn't been Jace and Helena, someone had to try to mend the bridge. The Targaryens were as warm towards their relatives as the Dursleys had been towards Ariel, but more violent and with access to weapons of mass destruction. So what was the alternative? It frightened her more than she could admit out loud. I thought Aegon was to marry Cassandra Baratheon at the time, and I didn't think either you or Rhaena would want that match. Though I should have talked with Jace. It was unfair to discuss my opinion regarding his future before consulting his preferences. But I never had any nefarious intentions. I hoped to strengthen him, and Helena said she told me she was in favor of the match. Ariel trailed off, knowing she wasn't helping her case anymore, and rushed ahead. I had never talked openly with His Grace before that day, and I had little hope he'd listen. Why would he? But I tried. I wanted to impress upon him that if he didn't take actions, his succession might end up contested. Though it turns out Princess Rhaenyra had the same idea years ago, but perhaps hearing it from someone as foreign as me made an impact. If a lady with a language barrier can catch on to the tension within the royal family, then it needs to be rectified. Think, Bella. If I was talking nonsense, why would the king think I had a point? Why would he act on it? Are you going to tell me your family is not fractured? That everything would have been fine if left alone? Her explanation didn't serve to calm Bella at all. If anything, something like cold anger radiated from her. If that's how you feel, how come you never thought to mention this to me? The blunt truth would have slipped out with little grace hadn't Ariel bit down on her lip. It would sound like an excuse, as if she only said it to avoid being blamed. And yet, what else was she supposed to say? Because I knew it wouldn't remain private. I am not the one who's betrayed anyone here. Her black hair swayed as Ariel shook her head, defensiveness welling up in her. Bella was making it sound like she had been spiteful with her actions, as if hurting Bella had been the goal instead of the sacrifice. Have you ever kept a secret from Rhaena? I have kept secrets from her before. Willingly, Ariel challenged. Or was being separated by an ocean the only thing that stopped you two from confiding in each other? What does that matter? You had no right to do this! It wasn't your place to stick your nose into my future! You are my oldest friend and I trusted you! I covered for you! I kept quiet for you and this is how you repay me! You spoiled everything! Ariel braced against the insults, but she also wasn't following anymore. Covering? What are you on about? The night Aegon fell off the belfry, he only fell because of your fucking thunder spell! He was drunk and running around and then your spell hit and the thunder and light startled Aegon, making him slip off the edge and fall. Bella snarled. I didn't speak a word of it! Not to Rhaena or anyone! I have always been a friend to you, but you've been working against me! Ariel stared. Budding panic and vehement denial whirled together into a white buzz that left her speechless, and Bella wasn't done. Why did I bother? I should have thrown you to the Queen! Let's see how you enjoy being blamed for the crippling of her precious son! I didn't know. Ariel's mind was spinning in circles, the revelation jostling everything out of order. But the more she thought on it, the less far-fetched it seemed. She hadn't known exactly when Aegon fell, except that it had been fairly close to when Ariel found Fang. Hadn't Otto Hightower been dragged away from dealing with Fang because he'd just been informed his grandson was injured? I never meant... I sent that spell to alert Hagrid and get help. I was alone with a dying dog and it was harmless. A spell that simply made light and noise. It wasn't true lightning. I didn't change the weather pattern and you never said... Nor did Helena. Helena didn't mention this either. She's covering for you too, idiot! Bela said with venom. And no wonder! You were plotting to make her queen! Giving her everything was pushing me onto Aegon when you don't even like Aegon! My suggestion was that if Jacaerys was married to Helena, that could secure his position and help unite House Targaryen, and perhaps put a stop to those rumors. I am sorry though. I didn't know what it would lead to and I should have told you. Damn right you should have! Do you know how embarrassing it was to learn from members of court, complete strangers, that you don't think... Bela faltered and took a deep breath. Don't think I'm good enough to be queen. No, that was not what I said, Hale said firmly. That was never what I said. Quite the contrary. I actually told the king you had the makings of a fine queen. But I also said that your family is too powerful to remain divided, and that it wouldn't mend on its own. I'm supposed to marry into your family too, and that frightens me, Bela. If you don't understand why, then you are lying to yourself. You still put Helena before me. Helena is my friend too, and you all keep putting me in the middle, leaving me with no choice but to take a side, without regard of how I hate that. How do you feel being here with Aegon and away from Rhaena, torn between the man you're married to and your sister? What choice did I have but to point out the obvious? You're all egging war! Bela blinked repeatedly. And so you betrayed me. Admit it. Now Hariel was the one fighting for control of her temper. I am not going to take the blame for all that's wrong in your life. You don't see me blaming you for all that's wrong in mine. It's unfair. I'm not going to grovel for your forgiveness over the choices of kings and fathers too. Why would you blame me for anything? You were the one who turned your cloak on me and picked Helena. I picked the only option that seemed to have a sliver of a chance of a peaceful solution. She fought to stifle the defensive anger building up a dangerous pressure inside her. If she wasn't careful, she'd burst. Yet Hariel refused to take the fall for the whole situation. Hariel didn't create the family drama, but she tried to remind herself Bela still had a reason to be upset. This was about secret keeping. She too knew how hurtful secrets were. Though, I am sorry you got dragged into it too. I didn't actually think the king would listen, but it seems he did. Perchance the issue is that he didn't do so sooner. Sometimes it feels like all of this was too little too late, seeing as nothing is going right. Even then, I thought if Jace was betrothed to Helena, then you would be disappointed for a while, but I expected you'd get over it. Get over it? Bela repeated unfathomably. Alright, maybe that had been a poor choice of words. That had sounded so bad. But at the same time, it covered the gist of it, didn't it? Bela was 12 years old. She may be infatuated with Jace, but little girls could grow out of crushes. Hariel had grown out of her crush on both Sir Carl and Cregan, so why couldn't Bela move on from Jace too? Hariel didn't believe everyone were assigned only one perfect partner. And even if she was wrong, she didn't believe Bela's cousin coincidentally also happened to be her one true soulmate. Of course, this was before Hariel realized Bela would end up shackled to her other cousin as a result. She didn't fault Bela for favoring Jace ahead of Aegon. Hariel would too. I knew you'd be angry at me, and I deserve it. However, I expected you to have years to grow up and find someone who was perfect for you. Jacaerys is wonderful, but there's plenty of lords who'd bend over backwards to marry you. I didn't foresee this. I didn't foresee you and Aegon. So you threw Jace to Helena, and your excuse is that I should simply get over it, because I'm young and I'd have more offers in the future. Why the hell couldn't Bela understand? Why was she always so bloody stubborn? It felt like she was holding on to her righteous fury like it was a lifeline. Are you for real? Bela snarled. How did your plan turn out, Hariel? Why didn't you get over it? I did, Hariel hissed. Bela was utterly unfazed by her anger and reacted with a sudden burst of theatrical exasperation instead. Are you going to start your tale of woes of how you left your homeland again? She rolled her eyes. About how hard it was and everything you've lost? How long are you going to use that excuse, Hariel? No. Hariel swallowed down bile because her anger started to stir for real. No. Hariel wasn't sure she'd ever get over losing everything. How could she? How callously Bela dismissed the worst thing to ever happen to her made Hariel's capacity to feel empathy for Bela's situation rather difficult. Let me clarify. I was referring to my marriage pact with House Targaryen. Did you know of it? You're betrothed to Aemond. Everyone has heard of it. Before that, Hariel said slowly. I'm not talking about my recent betrothal. I'm asking you when you knew I would marry into House Targaryen. Aemond said he'd known for years, and Helena hinted at the same. I don't know. Father said... Bela seemed to realize this wasn't a random tangent and that the conversation was turning against her. Hariel traced her finger over the dragon head carved into the armrest of her chair, and finally asked something she'd held back for so many months. What did your father tell you regarding my future marriage prospects? Was it the same as Septa Mega was preaching? That as long as my future betrothed was true, honorable and from a good family he'd make a good match? Or was it more restricting than that? Perhaps along the lines of how, as I have no blood relation to the crown, my husband would always be another dragon rider, regardless of how I personally may feel about it, regardless of Hagrid's opinions too. This time Hariel was the one to have the truth confirmed from Bela's guilty expression. It stung to see her suspicions were true, but she'd been prepared for that. She'd guessed that Bela and Rhaena had probably always known that her alliance with the Targaryens would always end in a marriage pact. Aemond had known it, Helena too, and likely all the rest. It was only Hariel and Hagrid who hadn't been informed of that, at least until Aemond lost his temper back at Winterfell. It just stung that two of her closest friends had thought it justifiable to keep her in the dark. Simultaneously, it's not like she didn't understand. She'd forgiven Helena and Aemond. She thought she'd done the same with the twins. Except now Bela was throwing a fit for something similar happening to her. Bela hadn't been forthcoming about the inner politics of House Targaryen, and in return, Hariel had supported Helena's betrothal to Jace. At the time, she had honestly felt justified, but now there was a hint of uncertainty hanging around the memory. If Hariel hadn't felt betrayed and been arguing with Bela about Hagrid's bonding with Vigor at the time, would she still have done it? Bela didn't say anything. When was it? Hariel pushed, but again it was like talking to a wall. 1 year ago? Or 4? Tell me, after your father saw how Hagrid and I reacted to Prince Regio's proposal, did he order you and your sister to not talk of marriage alliances with me? Bela looked up sharply. Father didn't want to overwhelm you, she protested. He said as long as you were learning our ways and language, it was a kindness that we didn't overwhelm you. Besides, you weren't supposed to get betrothed before you turned 7 and 10. What was the point? I didn't know you'd throw out those rules. And for Aemond of all people. I had no idea you held such queer preferences, but I guess you are foreign. Please, I get you are young, you still are, but your father certainly didn't show you that level of consideration with Aegon. Do you honestly still believe it was out of consideration for my well-being? Hariel couldn't have held back the derisive scoff if she tried. Because to me it looks like he was keeping us under false pretenses. We specifically said that being forced to marry meant we would not join you to Westeros. So you went for the underhanded option instead. And now I'm stuck with no easy way out. Aemond called me a fool for not seeing it sooner. Maybe I was, but can you blame me for not being able to read minds? Hadn't Aemond told me what was going on, I'd still have no idea what was being schemed behind my back. Such as the candidates I almost ended up with. Joffrey has been mentioned more than once. A child. I've known him since he was a babe, and somehow he was still the better alternative. Hariel shook her head, a short bitter laugh breaking some of the tension. Did you know the king tried to marry me off to your father? That trivia fact finally got a different reaction from Bela than anger. Pardon? Twice, Hariel said dryly, that I've been made aware of. Once at Driftmark after your mother's funeral, and again when you were betrothed to Aegon. Your father turned it down, but that's the sort of thing he's kept in the dark. My father? Bela repeated, unnerved. My father and you? That doesn't sound right. Are you certain? Oh yes, she was sure all right. She spied on a council meeting and heard the king say it himself. She didn't think this was the best time to mention her law-breaking though. Ask the king if you please. Fortunately, your father turned it down, or I would have had to. That's... Bela frowned. I mean, my father is a great match for someone of your station. You sound as if you wished me for stepmother. Bela grimaced, whilst Harriel was reminded of Aemon's reaction to this topic and their similarities. She knew Bela would hate that match almost as much as Harriel would, but as always, no Targaryen could stomach any slight that went against how marriable they all were. I never wanted to marry your father, because guess what, you're not the only one with preferences between princes, and I am happy with Aemond. I don't enjoy seeing you miserable, but it sounds like that's what you wish for me. Would it please you to see me unhappily married too? Would it give me cause to utter a word of complaint? Or would you roll your eyes and brush it away as another one of my tales of woes? It's been hard to avoid such schemes when no one, neither you, your sister, Princess Rhaenyra, or even the king were forthcoming. I deserved the truth of my own situation, but you didn't give me that courtesy. It finally seemed to dawn on Bela that she couldn't reject Harriel's explanations outright without lying, and that would ruin her indignant and self-righteous accusations. She watched Bela pull her knife out of the tabletop. That's a whole other matter. You're changing the topic because that has nothing to do with what you did to me. Maybe it's not exactly the same, but can you start to understand why I didn't want to talk to you about this? I know you won't go against your father. He'll probably hear of this sooner or later now. Bela carefully drew her finger over the edge of her moonstone dagger. She didn't cut herself. Shows how much you know. Harriel held back a scoff, because what she'd said about Aegon's fall gave her pause. She still couldn't understand how she'd had anything to do with that. She'd heard Bela and Aegon were arguing, that it got physical, and Bela had a bruised face that made it hard to dispute. Some whispered Bela pushed him, though Harriel believed Bela and Helena when they both said he slipped. But from what? Outside some light and noise, the spell was harmless. Was it her fault Aegon was not steady on his feet? Was it the icy ground's fault if a person slipped on it? Harriel wanted to say no, but what if it was true? Bela could be stubborn and unreasonable, but she wasn't much of a liar. If that really happened, then Bela had kept secrets from everyone. Or maybe everyone had left for Dragonstone before she'd had a chance to do so? Daemon was her father, and she was loyal to him before most others. For that matter, she hadn't known Bela to keep anything of importance from Rhaena either. And what would happen to Harriel if Bela told her family that her magic caused Aegon's fall? What if she told Aemond? What if she told the king and queen? What would they think? Harriel hadn't meant any harm. She needed help because someone kidnapped and tortured Fang. If anyone was to be blamed for that, it should be the culprit. If he hadn't done that, she'd never have needed help, and she'd never have sent up that spell. Then maybe Aegon would never have slipped. The question remained though, would anyone but Harriel see it that way? I already apologized for how my actions affected you, Bela. Harriel tried to reason with her one last time. But you won't accept it, nor will you admit you did the same towards me. Am I supposed to feel pity for you now? You were given your happily ever after. Clutching the armrests, Harriel pulled herself up and out of the chair. My dog was recently kidnapped, tortured and murdered, Bela. A hint of regret crossed her face, if only briefly. That was unfortunate. Fang was a good dog, but still, Aemond jumps like a court jester to please you. Isn't it neat how things worked out perfectly for you anyway? So don't presume to understand my pain when you get to marry the man you want, receive an inheritance and no consequences. Harriel glanced towards the door and pulled her Acromantula cloak tighter. This was going nowhere. Yes, I'm fortunate to have Aemond, but it didn't come for free. Both Aemond and I had to readjust our expectations and make an effort. Perhaps you could try it sometime. Of everything she'd said, that was the remark that made Bella react as if Hariel had slapped her. You presume that I don't make an effort? Me? You have no idea what I'm going through. You don't care what's being asked of me or what Everything is horrible! And the ones I thought would always be on my side has turned their back on me. What? Hariel? What are you doing? It may have been a bit on the nose, but Hariel had turned her back on Bella, because she was heading with quick strides for the exit. Hariel! Her hand rested on the door handle when she turned back. Bella had risen to her feet as well, looking close to tears. It was almost enough to make Hariel return to her seat, but she wasn't done. What's the point of this discussion when you won't accept anything I tell you? When you'd already made up your mind? I get it, you won't forgive me. Fine then. It's not as if I can change what I said, and you can't change what you didn't say. So I'm done. Your father sold you to Aegon. The king sold you to Aegon. Your sister, cousins, grandmother, grandfather, and everyone else spoke their opinions regarding your future too. But that I once brought up a suggestion regarding Helena is what you can't forgive. I'm not going to sit here so you may take out your frustrations, because you think me a convenient punching bag. It's getting so bloody old.